Hi, everyone. Welcome to the main stage, sponsored by CGI. And for our next presentation, Beyond the Buzzwords, How Data-Driven Healthcare Actually Improves Patient Outcomes, I'd like to welcome the CI&T team and their guests. Speaking today will be Stacie Ruth, Luiz Cieslak, Jordan Harmon, and Ryan Mazeffa.
All right, everybody, good afternoon. Thanks for joining our session. I was looking at the agenda. We might be one of the few sessions that doesn't start with Gen AI. Doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it. It's the topic, but how do we actually get ready to that and to do this buzzword? So I'm joined today with a great group of panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves. I'm Luiz Cieslak. I run healthcare life science for CI&T. For those who are not familiar, we're right across the hallway. Stop by afterwards and have a conversation. We are a global technology partner for our clients. We work with hospital systems, we work with payers and pharmaceutical companies, life science companies, helping them enable their values, their goals through technology. And with that, let me introduce, I'll start from the far end and then come over. So Jordan.
Start with me, okay.
And my only question before you introduce, and as you introduce yourselves, share a fun or a challenging, more important challenge in using data on your daily lives.
In my daily life?
In your work life.
Oh, in work life, okay. Yeah, so good to be here. Jordan Harmon, I am the Chief Innovation and Products Officer for Catholic Health. Catholic Health is a 6-hospital system on Long Island. We have 3 SNFs, home care, and hospice. Before that, spent about 10 years at Hospital for Special Surgery in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, also running innovation. And as far as data in a work-life setting, we have a lot of stories, but I think one of the biggest challenges is trying to get all of the data that's segmented into the data lake to be able to coordinate across, identify the same patient in different locations so that you can actually make use out of it for commercial purposes. So we've talked a little bit about that.
So I'm Ryan Mazeffa. I lead data and analytics for U.S. Anesthesia Partners. We're an anesthesia provider. We have platforms in over 10 states, and we service over 2 million patients a year. So I started my career at Johnson & Johnson, and after Johnson & Johnson, I went to MedExpress and led analytics for MedExpress. We were acquired by United Health Group, did a lot of geospatial analytics and a lot of growth analytics. And at USAP, our biggest data problem right now that we're dealing with is we support over 500 different disparate facilities, from very large health systems down to dental offices. And getting data in a consistent format from these different providers and normalizing the data is extraordinarily challenging, because we have very different levels of sophistication of the partners that we're working with. So that's been a big focus right now, and looking at how we use machine learning and not necessarily generative AI to solve that problem, but simpler models.
Thank you for having me. I'm Stacie Ruth. I am a strategic growth advisor. I'm going on 27 years in the health technology arena, 18 of which I was at Philips, commercial leadership and also running businesses. Spent a little time at Best Buy Health as we were getting the health side of the business set up, and have just most recently left Samsung, where I led strategy and innovation. I'll tell you that the secret that I found in stitching all this together during a long career is really looking for unlocking the unmet need and the potential of a business. So I'm very focused on the business side of it, and that's what I'll bring when I talk today. And then I'll give you a little humorous side, since I'm an independent. I have named my agent Chatty Charlie, and I do a lot of my market research using Chatty Charlie. And I have found, as funny as this sounds, that the more polite I am when I'm utilizing AI, the better the outcomes. So I don't know if what that says exactly, either about me or the technology, but I have found that if we treat AI like an extended member of the team, then that seems to be how it responds.
It's interesting. We're getting more human on the AI. So let me put some perspective. Jordan, you mentioned the integration, knowing your patient across different systems, different parts of the hospital system. Ryan, you talked about the normalization of data, and Stacie, you bring up the independent view, somebody coming from the outside. So I'll start with you, because we talked about one element of that, home, bringing the data from outside, and how do you actually bring some of that outside? How do you reconcile? Like I noticed you have your ring, your Aura ring on, and wearables and all of that. How do you reconcile that with the challenges that Ryan and Jordan are posing in terms of finding the data and making sense of the data? How do you see organizations coming to about it?
Okay, so I started my journey with wearables in 2014 at Philips when we started what we called the connected sensing business. And it was the first time we were looking at care going toward home. So I'm careful to say that long ago it wasn't in the home as much as it was going toward the home. And we really focused on it being an alternate site of care. I will tell you that from the wearable perspective, we now have more data than we know what to do with. Of course, we all realize this. And it is not personalized in such a way that it has a really big impact either on your health. It gives you some information, not necessarily insights. But as I guide and advise companies, I really talk about the fact that the faster we can get this data and wearables to act in a very personalized way, the faster we're going to be able to see outcomes. So when I'll talk today, I'll talk through the lens of care at home, which is where the market has now evolved, and how wearables play a very big part in that.
Ryan, jumping to you, you mentioned the data, the normalization, the ability to come up with something. How do you see, when that comes together, how do you see the use of data impacting in a positive manner the outcome, how you're looking at this, especially when you think from the anesthesia side of things?
Yeah, so one of the things we're looking at right now is internally how we really make our operations efficient, try to help drive down costs for patients who are under a lot of pressure from insurance and rates being reduced. So we're looking at if we can bring in, we do internal coding and our RCM process is internalized. So how do we take that data and use it in a normalized way to make our organization much more efficient? So we're really focused on internal efficiency and affecting the cost of care and trying to drive the cost of care lower.
So great segue to get Jordan from the provider side. Jordan, how does that reconcile on the provider side? How do you look at the data? How do you see that?
Yeah, so I think of it in two ways. So a lot of people talk about AI, but the biggest problem is that most health systems don't even have a clue about how to structure their data. They don't have a sense of what kind of value they can bring from the data perspective, and even if they did, they don't know how to organize it. So, coming from HSS, one of the things that we did was focus on two different things. So one is administrative workflow. So if you're thinking about the way that you change your business in revenue cycle, note-taking operations, those types of things require a certain level of technical data. If you're going to make a change on a clinical side, the second vertical, you obviously have to think about what kind of notes, images, etc. that you can organize. So creating the two verticals that you can actually make sure that those things are coordinated and aligned. That's some of the things that you have to do in order to get prepared for things like AI and be able to change the system internally. So that's some of the things that we're working on. Yeah.
You mentioned just now the commercialization, thinking of different commercial models, even how you use your data, how you monetize. Some of the conversations you have mentioned, some initiatives going on in the industry about taking a different stance, like even thinking of the monetization of the data. Can you share a bit more about that some of that story that I think would be very useful for everybody here?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple companies here that are doing it from health systems. I think it's still nascent. I think a lot of health systems are struggling with the same problem, which is how do you use it responsibly? So, thinking about anonymizing the data in a way that you can actually partner with a commercial entity and be able to train some of those algorithms and models. Some of the lessons that we learned when I was at HSS were, structuring the data first and foremost, creating a third-party validation process so that you can actually set up your data and be able to use it for commercial purposes. So you're not interacting the model with patient-specific data. So, but a lot of health systems are going through this right now, and some of the tools here I think can certainly be helpful. But being able to have a team that's focused on that and thinking about it is really the only way you can start to commercialize and think through partnering with commercial entities to use that data meaningfully.
And Ryan, you sit on a unique position here on the panel because you interact with a lot of the hospital systems. You're a provider to the providers, and data, it's one of the big ways that you need to do to integrate with the providers and provide the service that they're expecting. How have the company gone about figuring out how to integrate them in the most effective way across the portfolio of companies and clients you have?
So we're a partner and in some ways a vendor to our hospital systems that we're supporting. So the most important thing for us is to be flexible and to meet people where they are. So that's been our biggest learning, is making sure that we're ready to adapt to what our partners are capable of doing and working there. And the point that Jordan made about data architecture and making sure that we have it set up in a way that we can utilize the data, that we know exactly what we're trying to do. It's true for commercialization, but it's also true for internal use. You really need to stand up and have your data architecture know exactly what you're trying to do. And then when you're bringing in data from external sources, you know where it needs to go, so you make sure you get the critical information. You don't spend time on things that you're not really going to use.
There's a preparation, there is a study. It's not just hoarding the data, it's labeling, getting that, and as you're ingesting it in the right way as well, so you can make sense out of it. Great insight. I'll touch on a topic that I don't want to get into too deep because we can go down the rabbit hole, but there's no way of us talking about the patient outcome, getting ready for AI without talking about the privacy, the security of data. Like we talked about before, HIPAA is the crutch, right? Oh, we can do this, we can't do that. Nothing is possible if you look at it from a regulatory perspective. But so far, what you all told me is, hey, we're doing data, we're using data, we're ingesting. There are ways. So what is the feedback, or what is the advice you can give to everybody here on how do you get structured and how do you go the right way about ingesting the data and making sense of the data? I'll start with you, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I was at a different conference actually, and there was a former executive and government policy leader talking about this exact topic, which is, the ship or the train has left the station on this. Like, people are using data for building algorithms, clinical care, interacting with commercial entities in ways that hopefully are, meeting the privacy and security, regulations. But more or less, there's a lot of times where, they're moving beyond that line. So I think it's really important. There's a couple external companies that have helped do this, where you can set up a secure environment, you can organize your data, and then anonymize it, and then have a third-party validation process to be sure that you've actually scrubbed the data from any personal identifiable information. And I think that we have to move in that direction, or and I've said this privately, but like all this talk about AI and use in a clinical setting is not really valuable unless we've actually been able to organize the data in a meaningful way, in a secure way, to be able to use it with commercial partners.
Ryan.
Yeah, and remembering that it's the patient's data at the end of the day. We're stewards of the patient's data, and it's theirs. It's not really ours. So we're protecting their data, and we're making sure we're tagging PHI, and we know where it is, and we know how it's being used, and we're very cautious in the partners that we work with, and the C that's out here, that we're selecting vendors that understand that it's the patient's data and they know how to protect it and we anonymize it as required to comply. But understanding the regulation is what's critical. Not being afraid of it, but understanding how to use the data appropriately.
I think one thing we talked before too that very often is data projects tend to be these massive undertakes, and everybody suffers the analysis paralysis. So it's starting smaller too. It's like this is the bite size, evolutive, iterative, so you can start building up right. Don't have to move the whole mountain all at once. I want to shift. I don't want to. We can talk policies and security all we want here for a long time, but data is the foundation for everything that we're doing in Gen AI. And I think we're getting there, Gen AI, finally, we touched on the subject, right, is Gen AI the solve it all? Is it all Gen AI? Do we need Gen AI, or there are other elements of it that we can tackle, and the data needs to be there? Ryan, I know you had a...
Yeah, so we're looking at lots of different types of models. I mean, random forest and old regression still works for a lot of different problems, but there are certain things where Gen AI, where a language model really comes into effect. And so we're exploring how do we have the data warehouse interface with our executives. So building the generative AI layer between the executive team and the data so that they can have a conversation with the data warehouse in natural language. That's an area where we think that Gen AI has some value and where this LLM space is really going to unlock something new for us.
Stacie, you mentioned something that stuck with me, the 3 A's in the context of AI, right? It's the automation, autonomy, augmentation. Is there a right level of AI, and how do you prioritize? What is the framework to think about that?
I tend to think about it that the application of AI needs to be at the lowest common denominator first. So we're trying to move very quickly into the agentic world, but I think there's a whole lot more that can be done. We have very broken processes, as you know. We have very fragmented experiences, all of which that might be able to be aided by lesser versions of AI, if you will. And I would also like to say, if you tie it back to some of the earlier questions, if you think about this, that we have the responsibility to think of it from the provider side, but also from the human side. And you did make the comment that the human owns the data, and that is absolutely true. But I think we owe it to start digging the tunnel from both sides so that we understand that something of relevance needs to be given back to the human as we expand the capabilities with AI. And that might look like a gentle nudge that comes to the individual. That might look like a care plan that has been converted into the next best action at the human side. And utilizing that AI to have them guided toward the next best action, but based on clinically relevant information that might have been based on bigger models or different types of validated clinical care. But I would just advocate that there's always a human on the other side of that data, whether it's the person who has their work augmented in the clinical setting or the human that's augmenting their behavior because of a recommendation that the AI makes.
Jordan, you had made a point of the training, right? Because I think that's one aspect that is very often overlooked of you can take advantage of the models, the practice, the data, a lot of the influence to train the less experienced doctors, the up and coming, the next generation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think to me this is one of the most exciting areas, which, I mean, we can get excited about revenue cycle, and I love revenue cycle. I mean, who doesn't? I think one of the things that's super interesting is being able to combine data that's never been combined before. So one of the examples that we used in years past was actually combining technical data that sits on a robot. So still sits on a hard drive in many cases by a lot of med tech companies. And a lot of folks are working to change that. But combining that and matching the patient up in the EMR, so you understand patient-reported outcome measures, you understand the clinical note, and you understand the technical data that's coming intraoperatively from the robot. I think some of the early findings around how do you guide some surgeon or clinician who may be doing far less cases in a remote area, similarly to someone who's doing, say, 600 cases a year 600 knees a year and be able to achieve some of the same outcomes. So I think that like we're at a point where we're getting to that, building those things into decision support and combining data sets that really haven't ever talked before. So it's kind of an exciting time, and I think that's why I keep talking about this collaboration between companies, nonprofit health systems, and other collaborators in healthcare. Because if we don't combine the data sets and really look at a patient longitudinally, like you can't build those models. And I was just shocked that we'd never even thought about like bringing technical data and from a hard drive and clinical data in EHR together. So I think more of that, like doing more of that will drive clinical outcomes and better achieve the outcomes that we want.
That's a great segue to how do we actually measure that outcome? What are the key
Great question.
tracks?
Yeah, that's a really tough. I mean, there's industry standards right now around patient-reported outcome measures. So if you're a hip or knee surgeon, it's like maybe the HIMSS or COOS patient-reported outcome measures. It's gait, it's step count, it's things that come from wearables as well. But really, it's I think asking the surgeon, the patient, and the clinician, like whether the experience was easier, whether they felt more comfortable in the environment, and they were guided in the right direction, not the wrong direction. And then did we achieve the ultimate goal? Like, did you actually take more steps faster? Did we prepare you better for, say, rehab, post-op? Like those kind of things, if we do a better job doing those things ahead of time, like that's what data can give us. That's the exciting stuff ahead, I think.
So I'll go back to business development 101 and being sure that there's actually an outcome for a couple of things at once, right? So I always think of it in terms of cough. You may have heard that the clinical outcome, of course, is very important. But when we have so many stakeholders across the health system or the health environment, you also have the O and the F, right? So you have the clinical as the C, operational as the O, and financial as the F. So it's very important when we're thinking about the outcomes that we're doing our best to hit all three of those at the same time. Of course, the human being in that mix in all three of the scenarios.
You both bring a great point of like the communication, the clarity. How do you get back? How can hospital systems get back to communicating this to patients, to the community, the importance of these projects and actually the improvements that we were seeing? Maybe I'll start with you, right?
Communicating it back to the patient or the community?
To both, because it's not one of the same.
No, it's not. And I think I don't think they're two different pathways, because I think a lot of times, like, and I told the story I think privately. We did a pilot with an Apple Watch and started to collect gait and step count information, and the patient actually gave the watch post-op to her husband, and we sort of were like, do you not understand like what we're doing with the data, right? So, but the communication is key, because training and understanding and educating them on like we're actually using this to make clinical decisions. And then on the flip side, like once you do that, you actually have to you have to communicate with surgeons and doctors, because they'd never looked at this stuff before. So we had never seen someone understand where, for a number of patients post-op, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, step count and gait information, and being able to predict where somebody should be based on BMI, age, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those things are relatively new. So back to your question, I mean, I think communicating clearly and educating patients beforehand so that they understand this is like, it's a work in progress, like we're using this together with you. We don't have everything figured out. And then on the flip side, being able to be talk about in the community, like this is it is innovation. We are trying new things, but ultimately, like we're trying to work towards a goal of achieving better outcomes and getting KPIs around success in measurable ways.
May I follow on? So if you think about it, at the root of it, we need for people to do something, right? For the outcome to improve, some behavior has to change or some action needs to be taken. And I think that we're missing the experience even in the way that we're designing health technology products today, and thinking about every product that's available or made available, whether it's AI backed or not. It's around what are we asking someone to do And how can technology help us to inform that individual why it's important that we're monitoring the steps from A to B and what types of outcome improvements might be possible for them if we see that. I think that as technology companies, we have to actually bring experience into the design of the product and demand that we are part of the solution that helps make people feel like they can take the next action or whatever has been written in their plan.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think that a lot of companies, and I won't name names here, but there's a lot of presumptions that they should know, and they should be glad that we're tracking them. You know, and I make a joke out of it, but I think what patients really need, and to a lot of your point, is like coaching and understanding how it's going to be used, making them feel comfortable. Because if you don't do that, they're not going to adopt, right?
There seems to be a very big opportunity in being a little more patient-centric, a little less system-centric, and educating, being part of that journey together.
And health system, we can learn that lesson. Like, we learned a lot. Like, we should educate them, and we're not technicians, but we need to be able to communicate it clearly and work with patients if there's a learning hurdle.
As we start to wrap up, I want to pose a question here to think about the future. We talked about the data, the importance of unifying the data, looking at it holistically, being able to look across the continuum of care from in-system to outside to the home setting. What do each one of you see that the future of healthcare holds, and how can we implement that future? Can start implementing that future now? Ryan, I'll start with you.
So one of the things that I've seen recently, the very disruptive technology being deployed at Houston Methodist Health System by a company called Appella, is they are putting cameras and microphones in the operating room and listening to what's happening. And talking with our anesthesiologists that are there as well, it's bringing accountability into the OR that's never been there before. The surgeon now needs to be on time because we know when the surgery started. It's not based on what somebody wrote down. There's a videotape. It can be replayed. And what they're doing with this technology is they're starting to automate the charting. So they're using advanced machine learning, generative AI, and figuring out what's happening in the room, and our clinicians won't need to chart for much longer. And so you're going to see automation flow through the healthcare ecosystem that's going to be dramatic. So I think the future it's beginning to come clear that healthcare is going to modernize. I think healthcare is probably 20 years behind the supply chain from a technology perspective. Don't think that's going to last too much longer. It's coming, and it's coming fast.
Stacie, what is your take?
So I think that in the very near future, we could very well have healthcare at an N of one. So personalized down to the person, the human, understanding their specific needs, the action plans that have been assigned to them, working on their health, whatever needs to come first. I work with a company called QZen, the founder is here. One of the elements that we look at there is getting the human to do something. And in order to do that, you have to have a very personalized way to nudge them. So I can't wait until I have my very own system that nudges me and says, you might want to think about doing this before you're doing this, right? This healthcare activity will drive a better outcome if you start with this one before you start with this one. So I don't think we're that far away from that reality.
I'll share my anecdote on this one before I go to you, Jordan. I tore my Achilles tendon a couple years back and went to a PT place. Got the most generic recommendation. Yeah, go do this. Things that were very against my recovery. Change places. Very quickly unsubscribed. Got nothing to do with them. Change places. Very focused. Very personalized. So, not to a 6'5", 250-pound person to do the exercise differently, but still things for my recovery. Loved them, got hurt afterwards, got back. So I was like, even from the commercialization perspective, it's like, yeah, it's better outcome. I actually recovered better. I spent just as much time on the other clinic, didn't recover as well. Went back, but we're getting there. It starts with even the little things. Jordan.
So I think I'm most excited. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I think can benefit. I'm most excited about, like, you mentioned personalized, but I think like in the clinical space where you're talking about like pharmacogenetics and using data on someone's genetic, the genetic data to make decisions clinically about what drugs should be prescribed early, and late, and so that's to me like really exciting because I think we've only scratched the surface there. Operationally, there's certainly things that we can improve, but I always feel like operationally, you have to be willing to change. You have to want to do it, and I think there's like so many compounding factors that it will move and it will continue to progress. I think the patient, consumer data that we're getting from some of the wearable technologies will only continue to improve, and I think hopefully health systems will actually be able to use it in the clinical care because it's really been a separate bifurcation. So it's like you have your Aura rings and your Whoops, and somebody's really healthy over here and they understand exactly all of what's going on in their sleep, but the doctor's like, I just want to know like your CBC, like can we just do a blood work? I don't know anything about you. So like I think having those things in the same record and being able to talk about them in the same vein will start to change some of that, and then we can move forward and predict. Then we can do some of the predicting.
Well, thank you so much for the insights. I hope everybody found it useful. Looks like we can all go back, and on Monday when we're back at work, start looking at breaking the silos, looking at holistically at the data. It's not the silo, it's not sitting, it's not the individual records, it's the holistic view of the patient with the record. So thank you so much. Enjoy HIMSS.